They are the single person. Okay. Good morning. We are starting the breathing and exchange of gas. Respiratory. We have started with the structure of the lungs. So we will first see the exchange of gases in the lung. First is exchange of gas. Exchange of first is exchange of gases. Exchange of respiratory gas, that CO2 and O2 in the alveoli. And the first part, alveoli. Before we go to this, the respiratory process has got a certain steps. Now, what are the 5 stages of respiration? Then we'll come to this. Now, the stages of respiration, first one is stages of respiration. Stages of respiration. The first is pulmonary respiration or breathing. Breathing. That is, it take in air and release air and give out air. And give out air. Give out air. Now the second one is exchange the pulmonary. This is breathing or external respiration or pulmonary respiration. Second is exchange of gas. Exchange of CO2 and O2 in the alveoli, in lungs, that is in alveoli. The second step. Now third is exchange between alveoli and the blood. Then from the exchange between blood and tissue. Blood and tissue. Then tissue oxidation. In tissue oxidation of respiratory substrate or particularly glucose, it gives energy. Breaking down of, you call that as respiratory substrate. Respiratory substrate. Other word, the substances which are broken down to release energy, mainly glucose. So tissue, this is called tissue respiration. Tissue respiration. Respiration or cellular oxidation. Cellular oxidation. Oxidation or internal respiration. Internal respiration. Then lastly, from tissue to blood. So from the blood to air sac, from the air sac, exterior. Now this tissue or exterior, that is exhaling. The whole thing is called exhaling. Exhaling or breathing out. So first is breathing or taking air and give out air. That is breathing. Breathing is taking air totally, taking air and give out air. So the first step is, so now taking air, giving out the step A. Now take this first. So for the breathing, taking in air. Breathing, the first step is inhale. Inhale air. Inhale air. Now inhaling air is taking in air. Then exchange of the gases in the air in the lungs. That is, the air fills in the lungs, in the lungs alveoli. From the lungs alveoli, exchange with the alveolar air in the blood. Then from the blood, the exchange of gases in the blood, that is from the lung to the blood and blood to the tissue, then tissue to the blood, blood to the lung back again. The circular manner it goes. So the entire circular pathway, that is, if you take in a circle, air to the lungs to the blood, then blood to the tissue, where tissue energy is produced, and from tissue back into the blood, from blood into the lung, then goes out in the air. Now this is like a half rotation going in and out. Now this entire reaction is actually the respiration. So the taking in air and giving out air this is a mechanical reaction, mechanical process. Just you're breathing in air and breathing out air. Now this is the first part of respiration, breathing. Now what we have to know? We have to know you take in air, this is not a mechanical process, you're breathing. How are you taking in air? That's the first part. Now second one, in the lungs, what happens to the air which you are taking in? Now, how it is getting in the blood, what happens to the air which you are breathing in? In the tissue, what happens to the blood? So, what's going to happen in the respiratory gases in each step is the chemical reaction, is the complete process of respiration, use of respiration. That is, taking in air and giving out air is a mechanical process. Just a physical process, automatically you take in air, you give out air with the help of some movement in your respiratory part, the chest region. And so, first part, how you take in air, you have to know, that is breathing in air, and how you send out air in this gap. You should know how do we take in and how do we give out. For that, the movement of the chest, that is aided by certain muscles associated with thoracic muscles. The thoracic muscles are also known as the respiratory muscles. Apart from where are these respiratory muscles? They are between the two ribs. So between the two ribs, there are thin muscle fibers are there. Two layers of muscle fibers are arranged. So in the first part of the taking in air and giving out air, we are going to see the respiratory movement. That's what we mean the respiratory movement. Then when you come to the lung, inside the lung, what process goes on in the lung? The air fills the alveoli. So the second process we are going to see how the diffusion of the gases occur between the alveoli and the blood. So what are we going to see in the blood? The gas which has come into the blood, how it is transported in the blood. In what form, in different ways it's transported in the blood. When you come to the tissue, what happens to the gas which moves into the tissue, that is into each and every cell, from the blood, what is the use of the gas? And what is the chemical reaction brings out? As a result of chemical reaction, what is the result? Energy is produced. So these are the major steps. Air entering in, and exchange of gas. That is why the title is exchange of gases. Then the air is a mixture of gas, you know that. So the air when enters in, it fills the lungs. From the lungs, only though air is a mixture of gases, the major respiratory gases are oxygen and CO2, carbon dioxide. You know, well, air is a mixture of different gases. Maximum 75% is nitrogen. Oxygen, carbon dioxide is only point level. Then inert gases. Though we breathe a mixture of gases, that is air, what do we need? We utilize only two components there, that is oxygen and giving out carbon dioxide. Now, oxygen is the one which are using to oxidize the food. Carbon dioxide, a byproduct, which is poisonous, and it could easily dissolve in the liquid or in your blood. So, we are sending out CO2. So, the entire respiratory process, respiration, is mainly separating oxygen from the air which you breathe in and distributing it into each and every cell to produce energy. During the chemical reaction, the waste will be produced, that is eliminated. That is CO2. So we are only concentrating on this exchange of CO2 and CO2. Now this exchange occurs in two cases. That is from the alveoli to the blood, from the blood to the tissue. One-way traffic forward. Then back again from the tissue to the blood and blood to the alveoli and out. So in this pathway, you have got concentration of these gases in the lung, that is in the air which you breathe in, the amount of oxygen or CO2 in the air which you breathe in, the amount of the oxygen or CO2 which is present in the blood, okay, and that affects the reaction in the tissue. Apart from these two factors, that is the amount we want to say partial pressure. So partial pressure of oxygen in the alveoli. First, partial pressure, every gas has got a partial pressure. What happens to the gas? Nitrogen. Nitrogen is an inert gas. How much ever amount we breathe in, so much amount of the nitrogen will never be absorbed by the cell, by our blood, or it cannot be carried by the blood. It will not be absorbed by the cell directly because it's an inert gas. But we need nitrogen maximum because to build a cell you need protoplasm. Protoplasm contains maximum and nitrogenous compound. There is a protein. So nitrogen, though it is essential for a building up of the cell, we cannot take the free nitrogen which is available abundantly in the air. Comparatively, it is maximum in the air than the other gases. So which form can take nitrogen? So we can take nitrogen in the form of salt, nitrate and nitrate via your food matter. Through your digestive system only, the nitrogen can be assimilated into the cell, not through respiratory pathway. So, but oxygen and CO2 are the ones which can be carried or passed on. It's not an inert gases. So the nitrogen in your air, the amount of nitrogen which you breathe in will exactly the same amount of nitrogen will be expelled out when you breathe out. But the amount of oxygen and CO2 will vary. The amount of oxygen in the air which you breathe in will be more and it will be less in the air which you breathe out. So amount of CO2 will be less in the air which you breathe in, it will be more in the air which you breathe out. That is normal breathing. But the breathing goes on in 4 stages. That is air, tissue, blood, air, lungs, tissue, blood, and tissue. These are the 4 stations where forward as well as the backward, entry and exit. So now in this idea, we have to go over here. So what happens? Breathing or inhaling air. Inhale air, mixture of gases. So according to the partial pressure of the gases, the exchange can occur. That is, the gases diffuse along the concentration gradient. They're not active transport, concentration gradient. So wherever CO2 is more, suppose it is there is a barrier, there is a barrier in the sense, there is a block O2 here and CO2 here. So if O2 is more and CO2 is less, automatically this will go in. And if CO2 is more here and CO2 is less this side, automatically CO2 is less this side, it will come out. That's what we mean by concentration gradient. So exchange of this O2 and the CO2 in the lungs, between the lung and the blood is mainly by diffusion process, depending on the concentration. We won't use the word partial pressure of oxygen and CO2 in the air which you breathe in. A difference between the partial pressure of oxygen in your blood and the alveoli in the lung. Blood and between the exchanges between the lung, both the gases. So what will be there automatically in the air which you breathe in, common sense, oxygen should be more. Say take this is air. Now, so exchange of gases in the lungs between the alveoli and the blood. Next is between the blood and the alveoli. And then blood and the tissue, blood and the alveoli, then blood and the tissue, from tissue back to the blood. In the tissue, certain things are occurring. Now, the action which occurs, reaction which occurs in the tissue is a chemical reaction. That you will be studying in detail in the previous chapter under the form of glycolysis and Krebs cycle. Completely, the oxygen which has entered in each and every cell, it is used up to oxidize the substrate glucose. That is what you mean by tissue oxidation. Glucose is oxidized. And that glucose is called the respiratory substrate. It need not be glucose also. It can be amino acids or fatty acids. End product of your digestion. Now, by breaking down of this, by oxidation or chemical breaking up of these substrates, energy is released. Amount of energy will be different. So the oxygen which you are taking in is transported via the blood to the tissue. In the tissue oxidation of the substances occur. What the result of the oxidation? Energy is released and it is stored in each and every cell in the form of ATP. This entire part you will be studying under the chemical reaction in another chapter. We are only bothered about now. So as a byproduct, you will, during the chemical reaction, waste will be produced. Now what is the waste produced? Main CO2 and water will be the waste in the tissue, and this will be expelled out. How is it expelled out? It has to come to the lung. So from the tissue back again it will mix with the blood and go to the lungs and air. So this exchange between these things can be done in a, this is the entire process of exchange of gases. Sorry. So all these exchanges you can see in a simple tabular column. That is, we take a tabulation. Let us see how about the tabulation. Now you write gases here, gases. Then first is in the air, then in the alveoli or lungs. You can write it as a lungs. Then from the lungs, it enters into the venous blood. Venous blood. In other words, venous blood is pulmonary artery. You know very well, pulmonary artery is the blood vessel which carries deoxygenated blood to the lungs for purification. So the next one it goes to the blood is goes the atrial blood, purified blood, atrial blood, atrial blood, atrial blood, that is in the pulmonary vein. Then to finally to the tissue. So in all these three, in all these columns, you should know the concentration or P. So you write partial PO2 means partial pressure of oxygen. PCO2 means partial pressure of CO2. So we are going to see how much is oxygen in all these stages and how much is CO2 in all these stages. So CO2. That is partial pressure of O2 in the air, partial pressure of CO2 in the air again. So automatically the partial pressure of O2 will be more in the air, which region is about 129 to 150. Now the CO2 will be very less, it's 40. That is partial pressure is measured in mmHg. Now again alveoli, when it comes to alveoli, it will become 104 mmHg. The alveoli it remains the same. Hg, not kg, Hg. Then when it comes to the venous blood oxygen will be lesser, CO2 will be more. So oxygen concentration in the venous blood is only 40 mmHg, and CO2 will be more, that is 45 mmHg. So once this exchange occurs, the blood is purified, oxygen will increase. So oxygen will become 95 mmHg, and this will become 40 mmHg. Now in the tissue, automatically oxygen will be less, CO2 will be more. So oxygen, the tissue has got oxygen less, that is oxygen will be 40 mmHg and 45 mmHg is the CO2. So this is a rule, partial pressure. As a result, what happens? The air has got all the amount of, why this amount of oxygen or partial pressure, the amount of oxygen decreases. When the air passes through the alveoli, as we studied last, it has to pass through the conducting system of the trachea, bronchus, diaphragm, bronchial, secondary bronchial, all that. So this conducting pathway, certain amount of oxygen could be taken in directly by the cells over there. So the amount of oxygen, by the time it passes a pathway and comes the alveoli or the air sac, the amount becomes slightly less. It need not be 129 to 110 to 129, you can say. So that the values need not be exactly perfect because it will be a ranging value according to the air which you breathe in. Suppose you are inside the factory, the CO2 item in the air which you breathe in may be more. If you are staying near a cement factory, the cement particles, you know that very well. If there is a factory which uses a sulfur dioxide content will be more in the air. So depending on the air which you breathe in, normally the oxygen in the air will be more than, we are only bothered with O2 and CO2. So O2 concentration will be more in the air than the CO2. But when it comes to alveoli, it is slightly lesser than CO2 remains the same. Now, when the exchange is occurring between the alveoli is surrounded the blood vessels. It is surrounded by venous capillary as well as arterial capillary. So when it is surrounded, the first gas goes to the venous capillaries of the artery, which carries the venous blood. The arterial capillary exchanges. So all the CO2 is exchanged. So 104, the oxygen is exchanged. The amount of the oxygen will become lesser. That is, the blood which is coming is impure blood. It has got less oxygen and more carbon dioxide. Now, this carbon dioxide is exchanged with the oxygen. So, the blood is purified. So, automatically, carbon dioxide level will become less and oxygen level will become more 95. The atrial, not atri, it is atrial blood. This is atrial blood, that is pulmonary artery atrial blood. Atrial blood is an exception in our body. Atrial blood has got more CO2. All the atrial blood will have more O2. Now, this is the venous blood. Again, another exception in your body. All the veins carry impure blood or deoxygenated blood except pulmonary vein. So, the blood from the pulmonary artery, which is impure, or atrial blood has got more CO2, the more CO2 than oxygen. So, this more CO2 is exchanged with the air in the alveoli. So, oxygen gets into it. You call the blood is purified, and the purified blood is carried by the pulmonary vein. So, this is the venous blood in the lungs. So the venous blood, oxygen will become more because already it has expelled out the CO2 and CO2 will become less. Now back again, the atrial blood goes to the tissue. The atrial blood is utilized to oxidize. So in the tissue, the concentration of CO2 will increase, O2 will decrease. Why? In this gap, you have got the oxidation of the food. This oxygen is used to oxidize the food. So as a result of oxidation, the amount of oxygen used, it is getting used. So the oxygen will become lesser as the tissue consumes oxygen from the blood. So CO2 level in the tissue will increase. As a result, what will happen? When the tissue level CO2, when you compare this from the tissue, it will come to the blood. Back again, the same CO2 level is in the atrial blood. It comes the vein, then through the vein it comes to the heart. From the heart, it comes to the alveoli. From the alveoli, it is expelled out. Now, this is the partial pressure of the gases, which helps in the exchange of gases in the part between these parts. What are the parts? Between the air and the lungs, or air and the alveoli, and so the exchange is between air to alveoli and the blood and the tissue to the blood, then blood to the alveoli and outside. So this is the partial process. They can ask you how the question can be ordered. We are bothered about it. And there are two factors which affect this exchanges, whether it is in between any two, whether to alveoli to blood or blood to tissue or tissue to blood. There are two factors. That is P of PO2, partial pressure of O2. Then PCO2, next factor. Next factor is hydrogen ion concentration and temperature. So this is one of the questions they can ask. In this they can ask you anything. That they can ask you compare the partial pressure of oxygen between the alveoli and the atrial blood. They say atrial blood. Atrial blood means you should not think it's a pure blood or oxygenated blood. It's a deoxygenated blood in the case of the lungs. Pulmonary artery blood is impure. In a common language, it's impure. It is deoxygenated. So, what is the partial pressure of O2 and CO2 between atrial blood of the lungs? The trickiness is in the atrial blood and alveoli. They can ask you what's the partial pressure between the tissue and the alveoli. The tissue, there will be more CO2. From the tissue, it cannot come to alveoli, exchange to the blood. So the CO2 will come to the blood. After oxygen is given off, the CO2 in the blood will increase because the venous blood or the blood which goes to the tissue is a pure blood or venous blood or oxygenated blood, particularly in the case of lungs. In the lungs, you should keep this word venous and atrial blood in your mind when you're reading the question, because atrial blood in the lung is impure or deoxygenated or more CO2. Venous blood is oxygenated or pure blood has got more oxygen. Venous blood is supplied to the tissue, and the atrial blood brings the impurity from the tissue. So when the exchange occurs, they can ask you the different exchange between the venous blood and the tissue. So you should not muddle up and read these lines clearly. They can give you the different partial pressure, or they can give you the same column and leave out the gap, any one of that, and ask you what is the partial pressure of O2 in the tissue and O2 in the alveoli, or what is the partial difference in the partial pressure between the atrial blood and venous blood in the lungs. So what's the partial pressure of these gases between the alveoli and the blood? Incoming blood, they'll ask you, or outgoing blood. So this in different manner they can twist and ask a question in any point of view. Another, this tabular column alone. So you should be very thorough. It's there in your textbook. The values and when you study, think. Except the clicking is here in the atrial blood and venous blood. Next, second question can be worded on what are the factors which affect this exchange of gases. One factor is the partial pressure of O2, partial pressure of CO2. Another factor is hydrogen ion concentration and temperature. So when the CO2 increases, temperature will increase and H plus also increase. Keep that as a click. When you come to the tissue, exchange of tissue, partial pressure, the temperature will be low. Less temperature will be low and hydrogen ion concentration will be less. So the factors which affect this exchanges, these four factors, there also they can orient the question. Apart from the partial pressure of the gases, what are the factors which affect the exchange of gases, or factors which affect the exchange of gases? Choice 1, option 1, PO2 and PCO2 and PO2 and temperature alone, or PO2, PCO2 plus hydrogen alone. So they can ask you which is the correct answer. So this is another question, another area where your question will be oriented. When we come to the exchange partial pressure. Now we have to see diagrammatically, histologically, how this exchange occurs in the alveoli. That is the second part of it. Exchange of gases in the alveoli. The alveoli, as you know, this is the bronchiole, primary bronchus, secondary bronchus, tertiary bronchus, terminal bronchus. Tertiary bronchus is the terminal, has got, say this is a tertiary bronchus, that has got the two parts. One, the upper part is known as the, say the bronchiole. Primary, secondary, tertiary bronchus and bronchiole. Last bronchiole, when it comes down and makes into a circular structure, alveoli. This bronchiole can be into initial bronchiole. This is called initial bronchiole. In your textbook, it will be given initial bronchiole and terminal bronchiole. Terminal bronchiole. In some books, the terminal bronchiole, also known as terminal bronchiole, is also known as alveolar duct. Alveolar duct. Now, what is the main difference? Till the initial bronchiole, it's a conducting system, no respiration business. From here, what is the respiration? Exchange of gases will not occur. The gas just passes. It does not enter into the cells around it. Now, that is one. Second, up till the initial bronchiole, the cartilaginous rings will be there. But the cartilaginous lining, normally we will think only it stops the trachea. It's not stopping the trachea alone. That's another, one of the questions will be oriented in this lesson. Cartilages are present in the conductive system, only in the trachea or bronchus or up till terminal bronchiole. Up the primary bronchus, secondary bronchus, tertiary bronchus and bronchiole. Up till the initial stage of bronchiole, cartilages will be there. But the cartilage will be very thin and small pieces. It's not ring-like thing in the trachea. So why these tubes are conducting air? It has to be kept a little bit stiff. Suppose the walls collapse and sticks on here, the air cannot come and enter into the final air sac. So the air sacs are like grapes bunches, and the stalk of the grape is this bronchiole. So the terminal up till the initial bronchiole, cartilaginous covering. That is one of the questions in the Neet they can ask you. Second one is the lower part is alveolar duct and the blown up area is the alveolar or the air sac. Now, another difference is the air sac is respiratory in function, exchange of gases occur, and another thing is the epithelial lining layer will change. In initial bronchiole, the lining layer will be mostly ciliated column, ciliated epithelium. It can be a cuboidal epithelium or columnar epithelium. Normally cuboidal epithelium, but invariably ciliated. The main idea of the ciliated is to trap the dust particle which comes along the air. And mucus secretion may be there. It can be cuboidal epithelium. It should be little slimy and wet. It cannot be a dry passage. Now, but when it comes to alveoli, it will become a squamous epithelium. The lining layer will be always in a squamous epithelial layer, in a mucous membrane. So this epithelium, another thing is only one layer of epithelium around it. There's a single layer of epithelium around. So only one layer of epithelium. And another thing is on either side of the alveoli, you have two blood vessels will come. Now there are two tubes. This is one tube, thin tube. Okay, it continues the one. It is surrounded on either side with the tubes, two tubes. That's all. And in one tube, now the blood flow will be downward. One tube it will be upward. So this is the blood flow. It is downward. It takes. So the blood which is coming in this tube will be a different in chemical nature. That is deoxygenated blood. It is a dirty blood filled with the CO2. Less oxygen and more CO2. That is the blood which is coming in. The blood which is passes through this blood vessel. Alright. Now the blood which goes up will have the blood flow here in this case will be upward. At the same time, the nature of the blood will change. The nature of the blood changes. It goes upward. This is the air sac. The air sac is lined by a single layer of cell. This is the capillary blood vessel which is surrounding. Now here is the air sac. The air sac or alveoli lined by a single layer of cell. Only one layer of cell. Now I got only one row of cells there. Squamous epithelial cells. In the case of small intestine, columnar epithelium. Here it is squamous epithelial cells. Being epithelial cells, we will have always you have to put up the nucleus there. So this sac is called the alveoli or air sac. Now what is coming in? Air is coming in. Air comes inside. Now here surrounded by thin blood vessel, the blood vessels are capillaries. So the capillaries, so the capillaries, it is surrounded by capillary. What is the idea of the capillary? The wall of the capillary also only one row of cell. The wall of the capillary also only a single layer of cell will be there. The red line is the capillary wall. The wall of the capillary also about one row of cell. Okay, so here also single layer of cell. That's the character. The blood is inside. So through one capillary the blood is flowing in, another capillary the blood is going out. Now let us take this is the wall of the capillary. Capillary is there. This is the wall of the capillary. Capillaries have got a single layer of cell. This is through one capillary the blood is flowing down. Here blood is flowing down. Here blood is flowing up. Now air has come inside. Now, so this single layer, because of the single layer, these are epithelial cells. So automatically, all the epithelial cells will have a basement membrane and the cells are arranged like this. Now, this is called basement membrane. Basement membrane. Now, you take a part of this much. That is, if you take this is squamous epithelial, the alveolar wall, you have a basement membrane. Now, the basement membrane is this. Now, these are the cells. These are the cells of the alveoli. And here take the capillary. The capillary. Now capillary has got epithelial cells. That epithelium is called endothelium. These cells are called endothelial cells. Now this will be the basement membrane. Okay. Now this is capillary because there is a blood there. Now say take any blood wherever it is. If you take the blood is passing through this. Now the wall of the capillary has got a single layer. The wall, this is alveoli. This is now this is alveoli. Alveoli. Now this is BD. So this is the endothelium. Endothelium means epithelium lining the capillary. Capillary has got a single row of cells, and there is a narrow space where the tissue fluid and the connective tissue will be there, and the basement this won't be so far away, they are closely stuck up. So the two base, this is the endothelium, and it is based on the basement membrane. So this is the basement membrane. The basement membrane. Basement membrane. And you have a small space in between. Now this is basement membrane of the inner epithelium. That is alveolar. So these three together, that is this basement membrane and the basement membrane of the capillary and the capillary space in between. So like these three together, basement membrane of the alveoli. You take basement membrane. Basement membrane of alveoli, and the narrow space inside, the space inside, the space in between, basement membrane of the capillary. All the three together known as diffusion membrane. This is called diffusion membrane. Diffusion membrane. This is one of the questions they asked, diffusion membrane. Why did they say that? Now, diffusion membrane in the case of lung, it is made up of three layers. One is the basement membrane of the alveolar epithelium, and the space in between where you have got the intercellular space, in the cleft or the space, narrow capillary space between the two capillary and the alveoli, where you have got the tissue fluid or the extracellular fluid, and then the basement membrane of the capillary, then endothelium. The epithelium, basement membrane, space, basement membrane, and endothelium. So the basement, these three, invariably they won't ask you the basement membrane of the capillary, they will straight away go to endothelium. So basement membrane of the alveoli, the space in between, and the winding space in between, and the endothelium. These three form the diffusion membrane. Diffusion membrane is of three layers membrane. One of the questions invariably they can have diagram question on this. They can label. They can ask you to labeling the diagram questions. How would it be in this figure? Now, first question for a Neet, they'll give you the diagram and take out the arrow. They can label one. This can be labeled as A. Now this can be labeled as B, and this can be labeled as C. So any manner they can label. Diagram, you should know all the parts. So before knowing the parts, first you will label out everything in this surrounding, then you will go over to the exchange. So first question is, what is the diffusion membrane? What is the diffusion membrane in the case of the lungs? It is three layered, one point. Second one, it is formed with the basement membrane of the alveoli. Then the narrow space, gluing space that is sticking on the two surfaces sticking on. Then the basement membrane of the epithelial endothelium of the capillary. So endothelium, the space in between, and the two basement membrane and the alveoli. Now these three layers are known as the diffusion. Same diffusion membrane will come in the case of the kidney also. Kidney, Bowman's capsule and glomerulus filtration membrane you call that as. Here you call that as the diffusion membrane. Now diagram, what are the diagrams they can ask you? Now they will put the arrow, the directions will be shown. Now they won't label anything, they'll give you like this. So how many labeling can be there in this case? First they can ask you, even this. This is alveolar duct. Alveolar duct. Second one is alveoli. Then this is the capillary. The capillary, using the arrow, you should know the capillary of the pulmonary artery. That is more important. They will give you the capillary of the pulmonary artery. Then you have got capillary. Now here, all the three, they can put an arrow together, all the three brackets, diffusion membrane. And they can ask you another question. They can arrow it and write diffusion membrane. That is A, alveolar duct, B, alveoli, C, that is C is the capillary of the pulmonary artery. C can be capillary of the pulmonary artery. Now D can be the diffusion membrane. All the three they can put together. Then E can be pulmonary vein. So these A, B, C, D, E. Sometimes they might not ask D, but A, B, C, and E, the four labeling is a must. So when you write the four labeling, they can give this as a D. So alveoli, capillary, the capillary is different. And same manner, they can label, ask you to label all the four, or miss out one and ask you to label, or incorrect labeling. So the partial pressure that exists between the air enters in. So O2 of the air will be more, in the air will be more. That is what I showed you in the tabula column 104, right? So but the O2, but exchange is between this. As the blood flows through the capillary, the exchange occurs. The blood does not stagnate there for exchange. How many alveoli will be there? There are millions of alveoli will be there. Each, the lung is nothing but made up of bunches of alveoli and the connective tissue in between the bunches. It looks like a bunch of grapes. That is the reason it is spongy in nature. It is not a solid structure because it's all filled with bubbles, small bubbles, or like grapes filled with the air. Like so, the entire lung is a spongy tissue because of the alveoli, air-filled cavity. That is the alveoli. Say A, what do you say? That alveolar duct. Now B is the alveoli. This is the alveoli. Now B is the wall of the alveoli. Now this is the vein, capillary of the incoming pulmonary artery. So capillary of the pulmonary vein. So I showed the difference in the blood. You have to be very careful when you are talking about pulmonary artery and when you are reading the question. So the question can be modeled with the diagram itself. Even they can ask you, they draw the question, they'll mark the, see how will, otherwise how can I twist the question in this case? I will just draw the figure and I'll ask you, and I'll put an arrow here, and I'll put this as A, and I'll write as B, and write as C. They'll ask you what is the pressure, the partial pressure of the gas in A, B, and C. That means only one gas. The question is, what is the partial PPO2 in A, B, and C? Well, so automatically, partial pressure of the O2 will be more in the alveoli. Now B is what? The incoming blood, which is oxygen, will be less. So how will you write PO2 in A? PO2 in A will alveoli will be 104 mmHg. What will be there in the incoming artery? Incoming artery is what? It's a venous blood, impure blood, pulmonary artery, but impure blood, impure blood. That is deoxygenated blood, more CO2 than in the oxygen. So oxygen only we have to write. They will ask you only oxygen, not CO2. Oxygen is more in the alveoli and less here. So oxygen will be 40 mmHg. Here oxygen back again will increase. That is 95 mmHg. This is a value. So this value option A, they will change it in A. A, B, C. A has got any of this number, they will interchange. So in option option 1, A partial pressure of O2 in A is 40, B is 90, C is 104. So they can twist you in this with the diagram itself. Same thing, like I can ask you, what is the partial pressure of O2 in alveoli? In A, that is in alveoli. In B, that is in the pulmonary artery, the incoming blood, which is the impure blood, or deoxygenated blood, which contains more CO2. So when I write O2, how will I write CO2? We take the partial pressure of CO2. Now PCO2, PCO2. How will be in the this is A, PO2. Like this. So what will be this PO2? Carbon dioxide level is very less in the case of the air. That is in alveoli. So the air alveoli will be less 40. When it comes to atrial blood, it will be more 45. Back again, the atrial blood will be no 40. This is very simple. So this is the value. We should know the right answer. They can exchange it. They can ask you CO2 is more in the incoming air, less in the other blood vessel will have more, but they can change the number 40 here and 45. Only CO2 is very easy to remember in a sense. This 40 and 45 will be shifting. In the case of oxygen, 104, 40 and 95. This is 95, 96. So the oxygen and CO2, they can ask you in the diagram itself, the tabular column. So you should know the tabular column thoroughly to answer. So this is the way the NEET question will be oriented in the case of the exchange of gases in the alveoli. Add on to that, the diagram of the alveoli can be used for a labeling. So this part you have to be very clear with the tabular column. Combine that with the alveolar structure. Invariably, they will ask you for labeling the parts. From there, they won't ask you diffusion membrane. How many layers they can ask you out of it. Any manner. And they can ask you the partial pressure of O2 and CO2 in the diagram itself. In the diagram, you should remember 3 parts. Alveolar air-filled cavity, incoming blood, impure blood, more CO2, pulmonary artery. Outgoing blood, more O2, pulmonary vein. These 3 points you have to be very clear. So outgoing blood will have more O2, air also will have more O2. Incoming blood will have more CO2, less O2 in these 3. So part 1, part 2, part 3. The yellow shade of mouth short, empty place, and the red shade. Now this is pulmonary vein, that's pulmonary artery. So you have to be very sure of the tabular column to fit it. And you have to read it carefully what they have asked, particularly when it comes to pulmonary artery and vein. This is the neat point of view. What are the questions they can ask in the alveolar? That's the one. The next one which you have to go is the respiratory movements. Okay. Then we come to the transport of these gases of the air. Respiratory movements are the respiratory movements. Heavy movements. Respiratory movements are mainly in the thoracic region. In the thoracic region, there are muscles involved called chest muscles or thoracic muscles or respiratory muscles. There are 4 respiratory muscles. Number 1, the main important one is intercostal muscle. Intercostal muscle. Intercostal means rib. Intercostal muscles are 2 kinds, external and internal. External, intercostal. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. The internal intercostal. Internal intercostal. Intercostal muscles. Then the next one is third muscle is diaphragm. DGM, because just below the lung, the sheet of muscle separating the thorax and the abdomen is the diaphragm. The lung rests on the diaphragm. So then fourth one is abdominal muscle, anteriorly abdominal muscle. Now in this, if you know, these are the four major muscles. Now the four muscles, how the external intercostal, internal intercostal. If you draw thoracic region, the two ribs are there. This is the rib, another rib is there. The external costal muscles extend between the two ribs. The external intercostal will be from the lower edge of the upper rib to the upper edge of the lower rib backward, like this, from behind, front to behind. They are in an oblique manner. They are not vertically, they are arranged in a slant, attach the lower limb of the upper rib, the upper limb of the lower rib transversely. Oblique muscle, it goes on. Now this is called external oblique. Oblique because oblique and external intercostal. Intercostal. The other one is internal intercostal. Internal intercostal is back again between the two ribs, but backward and forward. This is inside. Now this is outside, so the other one will be inside. So when you combine both, you have one layer is outside, one layer moving backward like this, upper layer or outer layer, and the other layer which is moving from to front to back. That will be facing inside, let us say. Inner one you cannot see, of course, see also. When these muscles contract, now this is one part. Automatically, it will, first it is external interval. Then another thing important one is, now these ribs, the ribs rotate back, the ribs go behind. Say the ribs are, they move backwards. You know, the rib slants backward, and the head of the rib is up, outward, and I've got a tubercle on the head. The rib is actually the rib part, if it has this is called shaft of the rib, and when it moves back, it has a small the head and an anterior tubercle. It's like this. You have a tubercle on the head. Now this will be fixing on to the attached to the vertebrae. So what happens when when the head can rotate and move outwardly? It's like a bucket and handle. Suppose you have a bucket you have got. Now imagine this is a bucket you have a handle. The handle will never be direct. There will be a knob over here. So when you lift it up, the knob will move slightly sideways and then only the handle will come outwardly. As it moves outward and then upward. So the same manner, when these ribs move, when there is another rib over here, when these rib muscles contract, now the ribs will be moved forward and at the same time the head will rotate. As a result, the ribs will move sideways and upward. That is, when the contraction of these muscles will bring the ribs upward and forward. So upward and forward simultaneously, because it's moving upward and forward, the head will rotate, it will move sideways. So the space inside the chest is increasing from front to back, back to front, at the same time sideways. So the external intercostal muscles which are attached to the upper bust between the two ribs, when it contracts, it pushes the rib forward, front forward, at the same time upward and forward. It moves upward and forward movement, and at the same time the head rotates, the entire rib will be swing outwardly, upward, forward, outward. So the movement of the external intercostal, upward, brings the ribs upward. The ribs are raised up, and it's pushed forward, and the head will rotate sideways. Instead of the sideward, we won't say sideways or laterally. Lateral means side. So this is on the head of the rib. So as a result, the whole head of rib. Now, so the whole thoracic cavity increases back to front. side to side, and upward, forward, sideward. So upward, forward, sideward, the whole space increases. And the space of the thoracic cavity increases mainly by the contraction of the ribs movement or contraction by the external intercostal muscle. Simultaneously, what will happen? You have the diaphragm. So the diaphragm below, the diaphragm a dome shaped structure, it will flatten. So the extension of the whole thoracic cavity increases in its capacity upward, forward, sideways. At the same time, the lower down. The diaphragm lowers down, increases the space vertically. So in all four dimensions, that forward and the ribs are slightly raised up. At the same time, diaphragm is flattened, ribs are straight up, so vertically, anterior, posteriorly, front and back, and laterally. So the thoracic cavity increases in all the three dimensions, front to back, up and down, side to side. So because of the expansion of the thoracic cavity in all the dimensions, the volume of the cavity increases, pressure falls. So due to the fall in the pressure, the outside air rushes in. So the external intercostal muscle and abdominal and diaphragm muscle. These are inspiratory muscles mainly. Inspiratory muscle means which helps for the entry of the air. How diaphragm flattens, at the same time ribs are raised up, so the whole dimension increases up and down vertically. And the contraction of the external intercostal muscle pushes the ribs forward. So expansion of the cavity anterior posteriorly. The thoracic cavity increases vertically. First vertical increase. Vertically, or you should know up and down. Top to down. Up and down. How? By it is by flattening of the diaphragm. Flattening of diaphragm. Otherwise, the diaphragm becomes flat. Not flat, it just lower down and presses the organ down. That's it. Diaphragm. Flattening is not correct. The lowering. It's not the correct word. You can use the word lowering of the diaphragm. And contraction of external intercostal muscle. So the intercostal muscle raises the rib. Raising the ribs. So the dimension expands vertically. Then second, then expanded by expansion anterior posteriorly. What do you mean by anterior posterior? From back to front. Back and front. Again intercostal muscle. Again external intercostal pushes the rib forward. And third is lateral. Lateral or sideways. By swinging the head of the rib. By the swing of the head of the rib. Now this movement is called bucket handle movement. Because the dimension is increasing in all that, volume increases, the pressure falls, the air rushes in. Now what the question will be, they can ask you how the dimension, that is diaphragm and the external intercostal and diaphragm. Or they can ask you what is inspiratory muscles. Or how this is when the inspiration air enters in. So what will happen? The muscle cannot remain in a contracted position. Relaxation of the muscle will bring the chest back again into it, and the whole thing will be pressed, volume decreases, the air is pushed out. So diaphragm raises back and the external intercostal muscle relaxes, the ribs lower down and pushes backward, and just the reversal occurs. At the same time, internal intercostal muscle and abdominal muscle helps in forced breathing, forced inspiration. When you suppose sometimes when you are sneezing or coughing, it's a respiratory movement. So the question here is these are the moments. How the Neet question could be worded for us. Now first they will ask you what are the respiratory muscles. The inspiratory muscle and expiratory muscle is more important. Expiratory muscles, they give you all the muscles names. What are the muscles? Internal, external, intercostal, abdomen. The diaphragm, abdominal muscle. Abdominal muscle is sheet of muscles in front of your abdomen. Now, do they help in this? The abdominal muscles, they compress slightly, compress back, push back and push back the organ inside. That is when you have got forced expiration, when you have to breathe out, when you have violent cough or sneezing, it's a respiratory movement where you are breathing out, violent breathing out comes. That is expiration. So internal and the intercostal and abdominal muscles are expiratory muscle. Expiratory muscle only during the violent breathing out. Inspiratory muscles are mainly external intercostal and diaphragm. So what are the dimensions it increases? The questions can be, now they can give you the different things and ask you what are the internal intercostal muscles. They'll mix up everything. Internal, abdominal muscle as well as diaphragm. Pick out which helps in breathing in. They'll mix up diaphragm, they may leave out abdomen. Abdominal muscles were post expiratory muscle, remember that. So the mixing up of the four muscles and the options can be given. That's one of the way they can help in orient the question for the Neet. Okay, then another thing they can ask is the dimension of thoracic cavity increases. Diaphragm helps in increasing the dimension vertically, laterally, and forward. That intricate they can ask you. Diaphragm is one of the. They'll give you different muscles. Pick out the respiratory muscle alone. They'll give you a thigh muscle or eye muscle. Pick out which are the respiratory muscles. Diaphragm also will be there. You should not think of diaphragm means immediately the digestive system. So they will mix up and pick out the respiratory muscle among them. Eyeball muscle, thigh muscle, smooth muscle, and diaphragm. So the muscle also they can mix up. So the function also they can mix up. So these are the ways the Neet question will be oriented in the point of your respiratory muscles. The next one which you have to go, the respiratory muscle, then we have to know certain point, that is the volume of the lungs. Now the volume are there are different, how much air can be accommodated in the lungs or the alveoli. The volumes are capacity of the lungs, lung capacity. Now the combination of the volume is known as the volume means the amount of the air which it can fill in. The combination of the different volume gives the capacity of the lungs. So what are the different volumes and capacities? This is called respiratory volumes. Respiratory volumes. The volumes are, respiratory volumes are, one is tidal volume. Tidal volume is a passive breathing. Just passive breathing. It's a passive, how much of air you can breathe in? Passive breathing. That is the tidal volume. It is about 500 ml. 500 ml. Now, this could be represented easily, we can learn through a graph figure. That is, you have a figure like this, schematic structure. You have tidal volume. Take like this way. In a graphical manner, first is tidal volume. The normal amount of air, normally without any effort, you can breathe in and breathe out. This is the tidal volume. Now, TV. TV is the passive amount of the passive breathing. Passive breathing. Taking in air and breathing out air without any effort. Then that is without consciousness about 500 ml. So this much is the 500 ml. This is the tidal volume. 500 ml. Then you take a breath a little bit deeper, breathing in, and a deep inspiration. That is, you can breathe a little bit more. So that will be shown with the upper. This is called inspiratory volume. Inspiratory volume means this 500 plus so much level. Now this whole thing from here to here is the inspiratory volume. That is, you can breathe in more extra. This is about 2000 to 2500 ml or milliliter. Then the amount of air which you can forcefully breathe out. That is, you will say that the next tidal volume will take, and the amount of air which you can make expiratory volume. That includes 500 plus this. This is about 1000 to 1500 ml. Now, why this varies? It varies from the sex, female to male. That is why they are not giving an exact value. So, uh, extending. How much ever you breathe out also, this is expiratory, this is inspiratory. From here to here is inspiratory volume. This is expiratory. Expiratory. How much ever you breathe out also, certain amount of air will remain inside your thing. That is called residual volume. See, that is the part behind here. How much ever you breathe out, certain amount of air will remain inside. If you take the graph, you can take another curve and then come down like this. This from here to here, you can breathe out maximum. And this is the expiratory volume. Expiratory volume. The extra air which you can breathe out is expiratory, and this is inspiratory, this is expiratory. And after breathing out, the volume which is left back here, this is called residual volume. That is, you cannot empty the lungs completely. This is residual volume. This is about 1000 to 1100 ml. That is how much air which you can normally passive breathing in and out is the tidal volume. This is the tidal volume. The amount of the air you can breathe in extra, that is the inspiratory volume, inspiratory capacity. That is this extra plus including the tidal volume. From here to here, inspiratory volume or inspiratory capacity. Then how much air with the forceful breathing which is sending out, that's about 1000 to 1500 ml. That is the expiratory volume. Even though you breathe out, little amount of air will be left back in your lung. That is the air. That's called the residual volume. Now the whole thing is the vital capacity. We have to join the volumes. That the volumes are tidal volume, inspiratory, expiratory, and residual volume. So when you combine the whole expiratory and inspiratory, that is, you bring this figure from down, you go up. The whole thing is called the vital capacity. So expiratory reserve volume, inspiratory reserve, expiratory reserve volume, inspiratory reserve volume is called. Inspiratory, okay, reserve volume. Inspiratory reserve. IRV, inspiratory reserve volume. You denote the IRV. Now, same manner here, this is known as expiratory reserve volume. Expiratory reserve volume. That is, expiratory reserve volume includes your 500 tidal volume also. So now if I combine expiratory reserve volume and inspiratory and expiratory reserve volume, that is the tidal vital capacity. So capacities are combination of the volumes will give you capacities. So capacity of IRV and ERV, that is IRV, inspirational reserve capacity, IRV volume, and ERV, expirational reserve volume, combination will give you the vital capacity. Vital capacity. Functional capacity, residual capacity. Another one is functional residual capacity in a sense. Residual volume plus this expiration. The expiratory reserve volume plus residual volume. That is from here to here is called the functional residual volume. Now, so the another one is functional residual volume. Functional residual volume. That is ERV plus ERV, expirational reserve volume plus residual volume, RV. Now combine everything. Now that is, you combine from here down here. Inspiratory reserve volume plus expiratory reserve volume. That is your vital capacity plus tidal volume. The whole thing is called the total lung capacity. The graph from here to here. The tidal volume, expiratory reserve volume from here, then from there to the inspiratory reserve volume. Combination of these two will give you vital capacity. If you add vital capacity and the residual volume, you will get the total lung capacity. Do you follow? So these volumes and capacities in a graph, if you learn it's easy how the question will be. They can ask you any number, amount. Now what is tidal volume is equal to? Tidal volume down, tidal volume, the number. Choices can be any number, it can be any one of this volume they can give you and ask you to choose. Same manner they can argue, particularly they'll ask you this vital capacity only. Vital capacity is two ways they can ask you. The vital capacity is a combination of ERV, IRV, or ERV. You should know what is ERV, IRV because question paper also will be given the short form only. They won't write the full term of inspirational reserve volume. Now, reserve volume and expirational reserve volume. They will give you the short form only. Combination of the IRV and ERV will be the vital capacity maybe. Another one they ask you residual volume and functional residual volume. What is the functional residual volume? They can combine any one of these volumes and ask you. Total lung capacity, invariably they won't ask you, they can ask you. So this short forms and the amount normally they won't ask you 105 ml. If they ask the amount, they won't ask you the tricky amounts less much, simpler ones. Like your tidal volume capacity they can ask you, residual volume capacity they can ask you, tidal volume capacity they can ask you. Because these volumes ranges from one line to another. It is 1000 to 1100, 2000 to 25. But the tidal volume and the residual volume will be more or less constant. If this is 1000 to 1100, but the tidal volume is invariably 500. So these two, they won't change. Volumes will not be changing. Will not be changed. So they can ask you the amount. But the other things, the volume ranges, they can ask you. So particularly the combination of the volumes and the capacities, they can give you a lot of options. Vital capacities. Oh, okay. Vital capacity is the IRV plus ERV, or they can combine tidal volume and IRV alone. They can give you ERV alone, or they can give you the value of the residual volume, all short form RV, vital capacity VC, IRV, ERV, TV. So everything you should know the abbreviated form also. Now this is about the volume and capacities. We'll proceed to the transport of the respiratory gases in the next class. Transport of oxygen and CO2, how it is transported in different forms, and the graphic representation of saturation of the oxygen in the next class. Thank you.